Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 245, season 5, episode 32, coming to you on what can only be described as the wildest day in a very, very long time. I want to timestamp it because I'm going to pull a Dan Cena here about timestamping the day and the moment, because I think not every moment and not every day and not every time we record a podcast is the timing of it significant, let's say. But today it's 3:10 p.m. on the 13th of June, year 2025. Over the course of the last 12 hours or so, the state of Israel has been on offense in attack mode against the Iranian regime, destroying arms facilities, nuclear facilities, and taking out leadership that have been a threat to the state of Israel, to the Jewish people, and really humanity. And it's been no other way to describe it, just been wild. Woken up this morning at 3 by a siren, different kind of siren, letting us know not that there was anything inbound, but that this had started and that people should be aware. And then over the course of hours, the information coming out about the attacks, staying close to a safe room because of inbound rockets, missiles, and UAVs. Thankfully, all the damage is in Iran. It's just one of those days, and you just feel like it's a day that things are turning again here. And it's continuing. It's not over. It will continue, I guess, unabated for a period of time until it's finished. And then when it's finished, who knows what the Middle East looks like at that point. And so it's one of those moments, and it's one of those days that needs to be stamped. And it's one of those things that in the course of history, you'll be able to learn and think about certain days and time when, what were they talking about that day? What were they thinking about that day? What was going on in their minds? So I spent the better part of the last 3 days preparing for a weekend where I was going to be speaking to a group of second-year students that are here in Israel for a leadership weekend on different aspects of how you take your dreams and make them reality. And so I prepared a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of material, a lot of content. And now that weekend isn't happening because they need to be near their location, their home base. I need to be near my home base. And it's not happening. And in the grander scheme of things, as important as that was going to be, what's going on around us and above us is far more, in every way, more important. So like always, I thank and I commend and I appreciate the defense leadership here in our country, the leadership in our country, even though I can't say I always agree with them on a lot of things. With respect to this, you can thank them and appreciate them for what they're doing. Again, not just for us here, but for us everywhere. Those who flew last night, those who were on the ground in Iran itself, thank you. Because you're making life better, you're making life safer, and you're creating a potential and opportunity for a future that I think we only sort of dreamed about and thought about, but never were we as close maybe to it as we are at this very and breathe. Okay, now to the podcast, if we can actually still do the podcast. Our topic of the week is what I call on leadership that lives just outside the spotlight. Leadership that lives just outside the spot. Now, I've talked in the past about anonymous figures. I've talked about people who show up in your life at certain moments and then disappear. I think we've all experienced that. There are friends who fade in, appear for a period of time in your story. There are maybe supporting players or they're third level players, and then they fade out and you don't hear from them again for many, many years for a whole host of reasons. I think that's normal for a lot of, there are certain people who stay in your life every day, closest of friends, family members, whatever they may be. But then you have this other group that they live outside the spotlight. They're there. You might call them background music to some degree. You might not even notice them most of the time, but they play a role. And so here I want to think about the following setup and situation. And this is completely unrelated to the first 4+ minutes of this week's podcast. Everyone knows Moses. Everyone knows Aaron. But almost no one, other than the people themselves, remember the Levites. not the tribe of Levi, not the Levite as a tribe, but the family members in that tribe who played the role of Levite in the tabernacle in the desert, and then ultimately in the temple in Jerusalem. And we still have them around us, right? They're descendants of this family, and they're called the Levites. In Hebrew, they're called Leviim, Levi. For the most part, they play a role, but their role is on some level forgotten. And yet they're super important. Effectively, they carry everything. In this week's Torah portion, the third in the book of Numbers, called Bahalotcha in Hebrew, we meet the Levites again. Now, the portion itself is most known for other stories. The idea of the second Passover, which we talked about before, the beginnings of the complaining and the breakdown of the structure of the community of the people in the desert, leading into the story of the spies next week. That starts here. And so the consecration of the Levites is overlooked, underreported, not talked about. However, the truth is that this group of people play a critical role and a critical leadership role in the camps and the community and the people of Israel's ability to function. They are consecrated. We see that. They are purified. They are appointed. They are put to work. And then they basically disappear into the background. Yes, they pop up here and there with certain city locations in the land itself later on, cities of refuge. They come up with respect to certain commandments. They have a role in them. The long term, they'll have a role as the instruments, musicians, and singers in the temple itself in Jerusalem. But for the most part, they disappear. They're not Aaron. They're not Moses. They're not the priests. They're not prophets. And so this conversation isn't about visionaries. It's about the leaders you forget, but in truth cannot survive without. And it's about the ones who you might forget who actually carry the whole thing, as the Levites do. So God, in this week's portion, instructs Moses to purify and elevate this family. They are shaved, they are sprinkled with water, they are waved before God, quote unquote, and they are designated in place of the firstborn to guard and carry the tabernacle. The service exists from the period of time from the age of 25 until the end of 50. That would be me now. And it's very structured and it's very intentional. And of course, it's sacred and holy work. But what are they doing here? Why do we need them? If we have Moses as call him the political leader, if you have Aaron, who is the spiritual leader or the religious leader, let's say, you have the priests who function as those who lead the religious community. If you have the elders or the court system that Moses implemented earlier on in the Bible, then what is this additional group of people called the Levites? It just was a question that started to think about maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it started to percolate a little bit more. And I thought about maybe doing this conversation earlier on. And I thought, you know what, here's a great place for it, because after this, we get into narrative mode again for a number of weeks. So here's a great place to stop and ask this question. What are they? How do we think about them? How do we think about that as it relates to leadership in the wilderness, leadership in general, and obviously coaching the Bible? So here's the core idea. The core idea of the Levites is they are what I will call a sacred operating system. They are the team you don't think about, you don't talk about, but are crucial and vital to success, without which you don't win. They're everyman, they're anonymous man, they're role players, but they're core and crucial to everything that's going to happen here. They embody a certain kind of discipline, specifically here in the desert. They're quite humble with respect to the role that they play, and they are protecting the divine by virtue of the fact that they sit and they live around in the encampment around the tabernacle. And then ultimately one of their jobs is to carry the load, right? They're going to carry the tabernacle when it's broken down. So when we think about that in the modern sense, that spans anywhere from the person who cleans the floors and tosses out the garbage on our team to the person who operates not as the partner of the founder, but as the head of operations, maybe even the head of finance, right? That's the span of it. They're this infrastructure, they're this system in play who, for the most part, are invisible, but indispensable. And so as it relates to the people in the desert, the Israelites there, the people of Israel, they're about to move. We've talked about this idea. They're about to move. But the tabernacle itself, this spiritual, religious, divine center that is the core space of the relationship, of meaning, of connection, doesn't travel casually. It's not an easy thing to do. It's portable, but it's not easily transportable. And so they make sure that it maintains its level of holiness, that when it's put back together, it quote unquote shines, but that the presence of God rests on it. And if it slips up in any way, shape, or form, then the sacred becomes ordinary. The spiritual becomes the spiritual structure, that is, the tabernacle becomes almost like a third piece of luggage. And then the people lose their center, and therefore they lose their gravity. And then who knows where it goes from there. So the Levites exist to make the sacred portable. And they take meaning and they make meaning movable without it falling apart. And so if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the idea of spiritual entropy, of it starting to fall apart, starting to break apart. So the Levites are a protection against that. They make sure that the center still means something, even when you're on the road. Give it an example. Their team goes to a conference. Better. They go on the road for 3 weeks to 5 or 6 different conferences in 5 or 6 different cities. They're carrying all the merch. They're carrying the backdrop. They're carrying the roll-ups. They're carrying the display. They're doing the presentations, the PowerPoints, the glad handing, the networking, all that other stuff. But it's not the CEO and founder of the company. It's not the CFO partner of the company. It's the team of the company going and do that. They represent on the move. It could get sloppy, it could fall apart, but if it doesn't, if it stays pristine, if it stays special, then they've done something, and then on some level, nobody realizes that they did. It doesn't work if you don't have that layer. Or I should say, it's exceptionally hard to pull off without that layer. Yes, we already have the Kohanim, the group of priests, the family of Aaron. They serve at the altar. They have Aaron. They have Moses also. Why do we need this third tier? Because the Moses-Aaron relationship, the Aaron priest family relationship role, is sacred leadership. But that sacred leadership doesn't work if there's no sacred infrastructure, if there's no sacred operating system in play. And if that collapses, you don't have a lot. Aaron provides ritual leadership and public presence, no question. The priestly family perform all the sacrifices and intercede between people and God. And the Levites, what are they? They carry, they guard, and they protect the sacred, ensuring that it survives the journey, that it's in place, and it's possible to use it as a spiritual center and a place of connection for all time. So it's not duplication. They're not doing something that somebody else is doing already. This is a division of sacred responsibility. Moses on one side, Aaron, the priests, the Levites. In a modern environment, this would be the epic genius CEO founder who doesn't have a system and therefore fails. This is like a synagogue or a church or whatever the spiritual location is, where they try to do ritual, but it doesn't have the logistics in place, and so it falls apart. And so whereas the Kohanim, the priests, serve the altar, the Levites serve to surround it. They protect the mission. And they come into place, it's important to appreciate, because the firstborn missed an opportunity when they participated, or they were connected to the story of the golden calf, where the Levites did not participate and then jumped at the opportunity to play a role. They helped Moses in executing on the punishment after the golden calf. They're rewarded by replacing the firstborn. And so what ends up happening is that this role, which was already in the system, but the people who play the role flip, it's a redesign of the leadership. The firstborn were inherited holiness. They had no other reason to be in that role other than that they were firstborn. The Levites take the role. And then the role and the responsibility is then designated to them as a result. And as a result, what do they get? What's the gift? What's the reward? They get to bear the burden of carrying the center of religious and spiritual connectivity in space for all time. Not a small role, much bigger than we consider. You want to think about it even further, you want to step back a little bit more. They are like the unseen backbone of everything. I'll give you a great example of it in just a second. Because when we think about leadership again, leadership really isn't just about being in the spotlight. It's really not just about being inspirational to the people. It's not being just the person who casts all the vision. Leadership also is the person who carries the weight, who guards the center, who's holding what's sacred, what's important, what's valuable, what's core to the organization, to the company, to the team, to the community, holding that together under enormous pressure. And so you need a system. And the system is quote unquote boring. The system is humble. The system has to be consistent. So consistent you don't even notice it. You don't draw attention. That's exactly the point. But that being said, they still anchor the mission as it's going on. And the truth is, without them, perhaps, even Moses couldn't lead. So there's an enormous weight to carry there. At the same time, there's an enormous burden, because if you don't ever get the spotlight, other than maybe the singing at the temple or a certain piece of certain commandments, it's hard to exist in that space and to accept that role. Yes, it's for a limited amount of time in your life, but to be the person who plays offensive line and protects the quarterback for 10 years and nobody notices you, as long as you don't make a mistake, you have to grow into that. You have to mature into that. You have to really want to be a part of the team, and the bigger picture has to be vital and important to you. Because if it's not, then you will let the weight drop. You will not be there to protect the center, to carry the load. And so in the space of sacred leadership, you have the Aaron space, you have the priest space, and you have the Levite space, which is, as we said, is the backbone, is the structural support, is something else entirely with no visibility, and actually in most cases it would know. And if you want to think about how that works today, I'm going to give you an example here. This is an example from the business world. I was trying to find it in my notes. Sorry, here we go. Vivek Varma. It is not a name you've heard of. It's just not. Vivek Varma was the COO of Starbucks. Sorry, chief of staff. I got that wrong. I don't know why I said that. Chief of staff. So Howard Schultz is the person you know from Starbucks. And if I had to ask you, name somebody famous who worked at Starbucks, you would say Howard Schultz, and understandably, because he was the visionary. He's the one talking about purpose, about values, about mission at a certain tone. Mr. Varma carried what we're calling here the sacred center. Behind the scenes, he orchestrated the mission's integrity. He protected the internal culture during difficult crises and during expansion. And when the company risked growing too fast and losing its core essence, its soul, it was Varma who made sure that the values traveled intact. So whereas Schultz inspired, Varma preserved. And as Schultz once put it, he carried the weight of our values through every tough call we had to make. So like the Levites, Varma wasn't seen, but was felt everywhere. He didn't offer the blessings or the vision. He protected the blessings path. In every sacred system, there's a leader who keeps it sacred while it's in motion. That's the Levite. That's Vivek Varma. The question is it you? Because not everyone is going to be Moses. Not everyone's going to be Aaron. Not everyone's going to be Howard Schultz. But someone has to play that crucial role. Someone has to be the offensive line, the center on the defensive line. It's unknown, crucial, vital. Because if we don't prioritize it, or if we don't acknowledge it even, then what happens is either the person gets taken for granted, they get ignored, plays further, they get burnt out, the system falls apart. It frays perhaps initially quietly and then dramatically and drastically. And people forget why that center matters until they don't have it anymore. So every moment that the center is being protected, that the sacred system is being managed, is being taken care of, is being monitored, is being, for lack of a better term, oiled to stay in good shape, is a moment that you can rest and be happy. But if you don't, it starts to collapse, you can't rely on it anymore, We don't have much. And so in the space where it's the tabernacle in the desert or the temple in Jerusalem, you have these people who are what you will call servants of the sanctity, whereas they don't lead the spirit spiritually, they do support everything structurally and can't take it for granted, can't deny the value of the role that they play. And so as a leader, there are a couple of things we can do. Number one, can honor them. Team, company, weekly, honor somebody. It was actually a great thing when I worked at Cause Match. It was implemented. I don't remember exactly when. It was like almost like employee of the week kind of an idea, where one member of the team nominated another member of the team and highlighted them publicly to the rest of the team for good work done, for keeping XYZ of the ethical values, basic core values of the company. Didn't matter what role they played. Most often they weren't the founder. There was someone on the team who did a good job, who did their job, and it's acknowledged. And if it's unseen for too long, it becomes unsustainable. So the first thing is to name it. Number two, you can be sure, and you have to be sure to build meaningful systems. What's working, what's not working? What's a problem in our system? What's a blockage in our system? What's a bottleneck? What's causing a rift? What's causing issue? How is that hurting the team? And go fix it. The third thing you can do as the leader is you can do something quietly. Not because you're hoping it leaks out and people find out about what you did quietly, but because that's how you lead, is doing things that no one sees. That could be sweeping the floor at the end of the day, emptying the garbage, straightening the chairs, washing the dishes in the company's sink at the end of the day. That's how the system holds. That's how sacred leadership comes to be, not at the senior level, but sub the senior level. And that has to be the culture of the organization as well. That's value. That's important. That's team. That's sacred. That's meaningful. And we do those things because we do those things, because that's the culture we breed. That's the culture we keep. That's the kind of message. That's the kind of identity we want to create for the team that we have. And it doesn't require credit. And so I'll ask you as we close out this week of Coaching the Bible, where am I leading only in the most visible of ways? Why is it the case? Or what is the reason that I'm only leading in those spaces and not in other? Who on my team is carrying the sacred burdens and I've never acknowledged them? When will I acknowledge them for? What are the systems in place? And you could put systems in quotes and take out the word systems and put people in place in there. What systems keep our mission centered while we're on the go? So if I'm a leader who travels a lot, selling, meeting, whatever, then who's holding that center so that I can go do that? Who am I trusting, relying on, leaning on heavily so that I can go do the work and the role that I acknowledged them? Have I thanked them? Have I appreciated them? Have I told them how valuable, crucial, and meaningful they are to the center, to the core, to the basic root of what it is that we're trying to do? If I haven't, when will I? And if they disappeared, what would fall apart? Because that's a big one. How truly valuable they are often and too often, and unfortunately, is known only after the person has departed. So keep those questions in mind and keep the ways in which we talk about the leadership that exists just outside the spotlight is valuable and crucial, and how you can acknowledge it and simply just stoke it and create culture around it. And to close it out, the Levites don't shout, they don't shine, but they do keep the sacred from shattering. In the wilderness, Moses led with vision, Aaron performed his role, the priests served, but it was the Levites who keep the vision from collapsing. And that's a leadership model worth remembering and perhaps worth becoming, because not all leaders stand up front. Some leadership walks in silence, carrying the sacred, holding the weight, asking for nothing, and keeping the mission alive. There's a quote that I saw, which I think was really great. It's an anonymous quote to finish it out this week on this incredible, incredible day. Silent service builds the strongest foundations. And who holds the mission on their shoulders, even if no one sees them? That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I do look forward to seeing you next week. Who knows what next week is going to bring.